We're going to move on, and what we're going to talk about next is transportation and signal transduction. So the transduction of signals and the role that the plasma membrane plays in this. Now, the plasma membrane actually has the physical machinery to transport substances from one side of the membrane to another. Usually this transportation happens from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration, hence needing to use these active mechanisms. Now, directing your attention to the screen, the top of the screen right there, you can see that the membrane's transport machinery will actually allow a cell to accumulate substances, for instance, sugars or amino acids, that it requires for various metabolic processes. Now, the plasma membrane is actually also able to specifically transport ions, thereby establishing ionic gradients across the plasma membrane. The sodium-potassium pump that we see up there in figure 8 is an excellent example of what I'm talking about. Now, this pump is actually embedded in the plasma membrane, and it facilitates the creation of a differential electrochemical gradient, or a different electric gradient outside and inside the cell. And this difference in electrical charge is actually used to generate and to propagate action potentials, which are the basis of nerve impulse function. So you can see that this capability is going to be crucial for cells like nerve cells and muscle cells. Now, figure 9 just highlights the fact that some membrane proteins are actually not static or fixed, as most of these illustrations might lead you to believe, but they can actually move, they can physically move to shuttle substances across the cell and the membrane. Now, another key function of the plasma membrane will be signal transduction, or responding to external signals. In this figure here, figure 10, it gives us a good example of the role that is played by the cell membrane and cell signaling pathways. The plasma membrane actually plays a very critical role in transducing signals. So basically what happens is that a receptor, or a signal receptor that's embedded in the plasma membrane, will facilitate the transduction, the reception and the transduction of a signal from the outside to the interior of the cell. So think about things like hormones or any ligands that bind to receptors on the surface of cells in order to convey a message or a signal to the interior of the cell. Now, in the example we have on the screen, we have the hormone insulin binding to its receptor and transmitting a signal or a message that causes another membrane protein, glucose transporter 4, to allow the passage of glucose into the cell from the external cellular environment. So different types of cells have membranes with different receptors, and therefore these receptors will be capable of recognizing and responding to different ligands that are in the environment. So the interaction of a plasma membrane with a receptor and an external ligand, it can either be stimulatory, causing the cell to do something, or it can be inhibitory, causing the cell to stop doing something. So this is another key function of the membrane proteins that we find embedded in the plasma membrane. So moving on, we're going to talk about the plasma membrane as a site, or what we call a scaffold, for enzymatic or biochemical activities. So membranes not only enclose compartments, but they are also distinct compartments themselves. So directing your attention to the figure on the left-hand side of the screen, this is a diagram of a section of an inner mitochondrial membrane, which is actually home to a series of complex enzymes that couple the energy released from oxidative phosphorylation to chemiosmosis to facilitate the production of ATP. Now, that's a process you're obviously going to encounter when you watch the lecture on energy metabolism. So, why membranes are important for biochemical processes is you have to remember that if reactions were happening or occurring randomly in solution, and there's the positions of those reactions could not be stabilized or controlled, the interactions of the enzymes and let's say their substrates would be dependent on random collisions. This would create a very inefficient process if you're trying to control or catalyze a biochemical pathway. So biological membranes or plasma membranes actually circumvent this problem by providing a cell with an extensive framework, or what we call a scaffolding, within which components can be ordered or placed in fixed positions for effective interactions. And the example on the screen right there is just that. In this example, we have the electron transport chain, or components of the electron transport chain, actively using the energy that is released from redox reactions, oxidation reduction reactions, to drive the creation of a proton gradient in the intermembrane space, the space between the inner and the outer mitochondrial membrane. Now, another enzyme called ATP synthase comes along and uses that established concentration gradient, that gradient of protons, to drive the production of ATP using ADP and a phosphate. This is a very key example of scaffolding, whereby the enzymes involved in a series of biochemical reactions are uniquely arranged in the plasma membrane to allow them to more efficiently perform their function. Now, on the right side of the screen right there, we have another really good example of what I mean by scaffolding. And here we're talking about the transduction of energy. As you should know, the chloroplasts in plant cells are responsible for producing or making energy in the form of simple sugars. Now, a lot of the enzymes that actually catalyze a series of reactions that result in the creation or in the synthesis of these simple sugars happen in the inner membrane, or happen in the membrane of chloroplasts. So, sorry, not mitochondria, but the membrane of chloroplasts. So, looking at these two reactions, we see two key fundamental reactions. One, we have the production of energy by mitochondria, and two, we have the production of food by chloroplasts, all of which are controlled by a complex series of chemical reactions. And as you can see, the only way to efficiently organize all these interdependent biochemical processes or reactions is to order them in some manner. And the plasma membrane actually provides an excellent site to do so. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on and